Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session on moving off from fossil fuel to diverse and sustainable energy. In the context of the work we do in Amsterdam, we call it leaving fossil fuel behind and moving to renewable energy if possible. My name is Joyeeta Gupta. I'm Professor of Climate Justice, Sustainability and Global Constitutionalism, and I've been working on climate change since 1989, so a very long time ago, before the negotiations began, and my life began as helping the negotiators in the Dutch Ministry of Environment to organize one of the earliest meetings on climate change. So you will no doubt accept that I'm a little frustrated at the slow progress. Let me introduce what we will be talking about. We will be talking about how do we help discuss the issue of both leaving fossil fuel behind, but also given that many countries in the world, including Kurdistan, have a higher demand than supply, how do we help them organize a transition to renewable energy and all the new challenges that it brings with a bigger grid demand, with maybe a battery system. So there are a number of challenges with that. Also, of course, the need for various rare materials such as lithium. So there is a lot of difficulties in also bringing renewables on board. But there's also a huge difficulty in closing down fossil fuel. And closing down fossil fuel also means that people who have jobs in the fossil fuel sector, which is a huge sector, will lose their jobs, and they also are very unhappy about that. So how do we give them a just transition? How do we help them move out of this? And how do we create a different transformation of the infrastructure of every single house, business, and the energy system in order to make sure that we all become fossil-free? I'm talking about going to zero, not net zero. So let me begin by introducing our panelists today. Our first panelist is Dr. Felix Grolman. He is the CEO of the VSP group, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his work and how he wants to contribute to the challenge of renewables and what this could mean for Kurdistan.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to all of you about how we leave fossils behind. I really like that because at some point we really need to stop burning things that have been in the ground for millions of years and are basically dead dinosaurs. So that is really important that we find the way out of there. But it is difficult to do it, right? I mean, we all saw what happened yesterday with the inauguration, and drill baby drill is being out there. So how does one kind of go and still makes this a success? And I think just going to speak a little bit about what we do at VSB Group and maybe give you a bit of a picture how I think that we can succeed in that. But because even looking at all this global developments, I think I'm still optimistic that we will make it. And I think the key ingredient why I'm optimistic is that it's economically the right thing to do. I think ecologically and ideologically, we are all in agreement probably here that it is the right thing to do, but economically it has to be, because then it makes sense. So I set up my first business investing into renewable energy in 2009, where I financed large utility scale wind farms and solar farms. Back then I paid about 4,000 euros a kilowatt peak for a solar farm in Europe. At the moment, that number is down at 250, right? So from 4,000, from 2009 to now, we're at around about 250. So it's incredibly cheap. And the only reason why that is so cheap is scale and that we have semiconductors involved here. So we actually have Moore's law. You all know in computers, things get cheaper and cheaper. We have a very similar thing in solar. We're seeing a very similar thing in lithium batteries. And we even see something a bit like that, not as intensive in wind. And so that's what makes me optimistic. But maybe a few words about VSB Group, the company I'm privileged to run at the moment. So we are a developer of utility scale energy solutions in the renewable space. So we build very large wind turbines. So for example, we're just building a park with 50 Eiffel Tower sized wind turbines in Finland, an investment volume of almost $1 billion. We're doing this all across Europe. We're doing very large solar operations. For example, the 300 megawatt park in Poland, the biggest one at the moment in the country. We are as well doing battery parks all over Europe. We have at the moment over 1 gigawatt of batteries in our pipeline, and we're doing e-mobility for heavy transport, for heavy trucks. So we bring our electricity that we produce in our wind, solar and battery stations directly to large logistic providers to charge their e-trucks. So in a way, we're doing everything around renewable, from finding a green field all the way to operating our asset and selling the electricity to the market. And that is a wonderful area to be in, and we are really have been quite successful in bringing that forward. We have a pipeline of about 18 gigawatts of all these things I've just listed, and we bring about 1 gigawatt a year to the market, which is an investment volume somewhere around 1.5 billion euros. So that works great, and we're very profitable. We're very happy with what we do. We have a great demand, but, and now comes the big but, we do it only in Europe. Right? We used to have boots on the ground in Northern Africa, in South Korea, even in Mongolia here before I became CEO. But none of that has really taken foot. So what I would love to discuss with you guys is how can we get this success that we have in Europe, in the US we used to until very recently, or let's see what's going to happen. How can we bring that to the global south? How can we bring that to regions where the actual cost of energy, even though there's a lot of fossil involved, is still much higher than it is in Europe or in the US or in certain parts of Asia. So how do we get it there where it's really needed? And I'd love to hear all your insights about that and talk a little bit about that.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to the failure in developing countries, but before that, let me give Joshua Verhoeven the opportunity to speak. He is a parliamentarian in Davos, and maybe he'll talk a little bit also about the politics and economics of transition in the energy field.
Yes, hi everybody. Thank you all for coming, and pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm Josh. I'm here in the Parliament of Davos. I also run the Social Democratic Party of the whole canton. And I think the legislative side is also very important on combining the public and the private sector with different things. We're talking about grids, we're talking about investment in the whole grids, and also the infrastructure, which is very important. Switzerland is one of the richest countries in the world. We could invest much, much more in things. We have a very difficult political system at the same time because it's very complicated, it's very stable, but because it's stable, it always takes a lot of time. There's multiple parties, multiple ideologies always involved with things. And even though it looks sometimes like we're making major steps forwards, we always also take steps back. And I think this is something we can see on the world stage, as you mentioned yesterday with Trump's inauguration. We need to figure out a solution where the countries themselves go into the right direction, but also collaboratively on a global scale. And I think we, especially in Europe, but also the global north, the rich countries, have to take part and responsibility in this to help also developing countries being able to make those infrastructures ready for their places.
Thank you. So that's a the question you raise is it difficult for rich countries to take action, which you demonstrate is very, very difficult. So let me come to Basima Abdulrahman, who is the CEO of KESK company. And maybe in your story, you tell us a little bit, not only about what you do, but your hopes for the future.
Thank you so much. KESK is a green tech startup based in Iraq. I'm personally the founder and CEO of the company. I established KESK in Kurdistan in 2018. Then we expanded to federal Iraq legally in 2021. When we started at the time, we started very small, very ambitious, but it was like really not the right time. Things were going slow. We were promoting sustainable solutions. We started actually by promoting and supplying solar air conditioning units. This is how we got like somehow well known with. And then the more we were engaging with clients and developing projects, we started also expanding to rooftop solar PV solutions. We haven't really got to the point to go all the way to utility scale, but we've done a fair amount of projects in terms of rooftop for residential, commercial, and also industrial. To be honest, I would say like the change in terms of like awareness started 2 years ago. This is when like we started getting organic requests and from various clients. But before that, we were actually the ones who were going out and trying to convince clients in numbers how they need to diverse. And the idea is that when we talk about Iraq, especially, it's like Iraq is, in general, and Kurdistan as, specifically, we are an oil-driven economy country. So you would think that, we will not really invest, and there would be so much lobby against, transitioning to renewable energy. But thankfully, this is not the case, and that's why I'm optimistic, and I'm still operating in Iraq, and I haven't really escaped yet, because there's no lobby to stop transitioning. Actually, the governments of Kurdistan and also the federal Iraq is putting together utilities plans to invest and attract investment in utility scale projects, and we're talking about around thousands of megawatts of utility scale solar energy projects. And the reason is that supply is really limited. The grid electricity is available only 50% of the time. So the alternative is all the time diesel generators. So if we compare economically, diesel generators cost per kilowatt is around 45 cents. We're talking about private diesel generators, while for solar in Iraq is around 17, starts at 17 cents per kilowatt. So that's a huge difference in terms of, cost and return on investment.
Thank you. So why are we talking about 2 degrees and 1.5, and why are we not talking about 1 degree? So, because I'm talking in terms of the optimism you showed. Last year, we published in Nature a paper where we argued that 1 degree is the just target, because already at 1 degree, 70 million people are exposed to very high temperatures and very high humidity, and that they can die at that. And in fact, pre-1990, there were already publications that were saying that up to 1 degree, it is green, beyond 1 and 2, it is orange, and beyond 2, it is red. And the problem is that from economic perspectives, many rich countries argue that they would not want to go for 1 degree. And so ultimately, they delayed the global target by 25 years to 2015, and then the target was 2 degrees, and only when the small island states demanded was 1.5 also included. So when you say you're optimistic, given that we passed last year 1.5, we haven't completely passed 1.5 because you need to wait for a few years. Why are you so optimistic? Where are we going to stop at the rate at which we are going right now? And do you think that is really safe and just for the global population? That's the first part. And the second part is, I would like you to explain a little bit why it was difficult in the developing countries. What were the reasons for you to stop?
Well, that's a very good question, and you caught me out here a little bit, because obviously, I'm optimistic because I am, just as a person, and I have to be, because otherwise I can't do my job, right?
Yeah.
But what you're saying is obviously very, very valid, and the problem with kind of being too little optimistic looking at this, because sometimes there might be a tipping point where you say it's no use anyways, let's just prepare for the worst, right? You don't hear that narrative a lot, but there's some people saying that we can't stay under the 2 degrees anyways.
So that's why it's worth being optimistic.
Probably, because otherwise you might, there's
Yeah.
certain tipping points in this world, and if we would realize that we're on the wrong side of this tipping point, then we should just all really go out and have a pizza instead of trying to save the world, right? But I don't. But let's come back to that, because I think we can still be optimistic, because of the tipping points, because in the economics that I sort of looked into, they are so good and they're getting so much better that at some point it's not going to matter if some guy in the US says we have to drill, because nobody will drill if they don't get paid, right? Nobody will drill if it just isn't worth it. And it's probably going to be worth it for a few more years, but what we see right now is the cost of the electricity that we can generate to deteriorate at an amazing rate. I just gave you that example with the solar power, right? And you just talked about this with residential solar. I sit on the board of one of the largest rooftop installers in Switzerland that puts solar on rooftop, a bit like what you're saying. And even here the costs go down like crazy. And partly that's thanks to China, right? I mean, in China we now have 1 terawatt of production capacity for solar. That's crazy. That's so much. I mean, the whole of Germany takes only about 80, 90 terawatt, right? And they can produce 1 just in solar every year. So the production capacity has gone up. The prices have gone down. The installation has gone up. And so we are at the point that it's so cheap to install solar that it's happening everywhere. The rates are booming. In Europe it's booming, in APAC, in China, everywhere it's just absolutely through the roof.
So let's go to the second question, which is what were the challenges in doing your work in developing countries?
I think that's basically where this leads to. So you have the really cheap infrastructure to put on the ground, but then you still need to finance it. It still costs money. So what we see in sort of northern countries, or so Western countries as they like to be called, we see the cost of credit being very low, even with interest rates going a bit higher now. I still can finance a 500 million project with 100 million equity, the rest in debt. I pay maybe 1.5%, 2% margin to my banks, and then I pay the sort of standard floating interest rates, and that's fine. And then I can calculate all of that. The same project with the same technology, with my same people, doing in Morocco or Algeria or Mongolia, would probably cost 2 to 3 times as much per kilowatt hour that I get out. And that's not because the infrastructure is so much more expensive, because that's a global good. Maybe it's a bit more expensive because of transport and import duties and things like that. It's the cost of credit that really kills you, because you have to factor in the credit risk of the country where you produce electricity, because in the end you need to sell it to someone. I mean, probably one of the things that you have as well, and you need to make sure they pay for it. So if I go out and want to raise 400 million debt for a project like this, everybody's going to ask me, but you have to add the risk premium for that country, and through that it becomes not financeable anymore.
Exactly. And so in the event that we really want to transform and try not to miss 1.6, we have to change the financial system in such a way that we can finance the global South's transformation. I think that's the message I'm getting from you.
Absolutely, and I mean, before I did these good things, I was on the other side and was an investment banker, but that's many, many years ago. And so I'm quite used to structuring risk and putting it where it belongs, because that's what we did in investment banking. And so in a way, you can just take that credit risk, you can structure it away, and you can put it with the World Bank, with an international organization, with somebody who wants to help, or with a large climate fund. So that's something that I'm trying to push forward on the political agenda, because I think that would be by way the best thing to do.
Thank you. Let me move to you, Josh. You were talking about the politics of decision making, and I have 2 specific questions for you. The first is climate change a social democratic issue? Is it not a liberal issue? And if it is a liberal issue, do they transform it into subsidies for the rich to buy renewables rather than to help the entire society change? How do you see the politics in terms of different political parties and how they see the science of climate change? And why do you think voters in the global north are voting in governments that are not interested in climate change?
That's a very good question. I think for like the Social Democratic Party, especially in Switzerland, we've always been on the forefront of climate change issues, especially in cantons like Grisons, where we are also quite affected by it. We have less snow than 20 years ago. Our mountains are collapsing. There is a town just 30 minutes away from here which has had to be evacuated because the mountain is moving so much and will collapse at any time. We are very affected by this. Our current mayor of Davos, he's also a social democrat, he put in the Green Deal strategy for the canton, which puts then millions and millions into renewables and also the infrastructure. On the Swiss side, we see that the liberals are also, depending on the timing, for climate change issues, but we see it on the left side only as long as it directly profits them. And we have a stable government, we have a stable political system, but we also do have a lot of lobbyism. And the money currently still is in oil companies. And so there we see that they still have a lot of power. We see a lot of parliamentarians sitting on boards. One of our current presidents, we have 7 of them, used to be an oil lobbyist himself, and we can see that he is not as interested in going to the direction of renewables.
What's his name?
Albert Rösti, as we have been before. He's also on the far right on the politic spectrum and running the Department of Environmental Issues. Just also maybe a little bit to the topics you talked about earlier and optimism stuff. We are here, I'm part of the Global Shapers community, which is a community of under 30-year-olds which want to, especially also in environmental issues, be on the forefront of it. This community is for people below 30, and we are 50 of them are here. They're taking part of the conversation in the Congress Center, and in the end, I think it's also a generational issue that the people who are in charge now, they know how it is with oil. They're just cleansing on the last bit of power they have because they know they will be too old soon to be in power. And whoever you talk to of people like the Global Shapers, which will be the leaders of the future, at least some of them, nobody is talking about, oh, let's keep fossil fuels. So I think that's also a big part where we can see optimism for our future. And also for the financial systems, right? This also on a governmental level, we need to figure out how to make those systems also more social, so that it isn't just, oh, you have a certain amount of equity, that means you can get the loans and be in debt more than other people. So these credit systems we have, these are laid out for the rich, and the banks profit from them, especially the people in the lead. I mean, we can sing a song about it with Credit Suisse going bankrupt. They take risks, so they can make a lot of bonuses in the end. So we need to figure out a way to make the financial system also more social, that everybody can profit from it. And also we need to check out how and who is using most of the fossil fuels.
So in your narrative, lobbying has become is a very important story. And what we see is that scientists say that the fossil fuel world is worth between 16 trillion and $295 trillion. So they are either 1/5 of global GDP or they are 3 times the size of global GDP. And that means they have enormous lobbying power. And through the last 35 years, we see them do revolving door, moving into government moving into these oil companies. So how do you think as a politician we can stop the lobbying process? Can we sort of legally ban it?
You can make those laws, but the problem is the people who are making the laws are also in those boards, right? So
It won't work.
Well, not the laws directly, but I think transparency is key. We just put forward a transparency law. We had elections last year where now you have to tell the people of Switzerland who vote for you where you're sitting on the board of and how much money you're getting from it. It hasn't made a major change yet in how people vote, but I think more and more will become that. I think also, though, that since electric companies and companies like yours, they see that we need to go into renewable energies. If we look in the social, political sides, all those NGOs and companies, they don't have money to lobby. Big electrical companies like you, they also do have financial resources. I'm not saying that they should hire the politicians on their boards, but it's, the level is, or the playing field is getting leveled, as in, how much money there is for and against different policies.
Thank you. Basira, you were talking about air conditioners and you were talking about rooftop. Is this the very rich people in your country, or is it the middle class, or is it the poor? Is it the schools, hospitals? Who are you talking about?
We can divide them into two categories. Those who are forced to invest in renewables, specifically this highly endowment, carbon emission sectors like oil and gas. By law, they are obligated to invest in renewable energy solutions. So there is some amount being dedicated to invest in.
And those who are not forced?
And those who are not forced, usually we talk about like individuals or
So
companies.
are the upper classes?
I would say like a mix between middle class in terms of like individual clients. If we're looking at like businesses, those who are, suffering and their operational costs are going really high by running diesel generators because they don't have access to grid power most of the time. So their return on investment can take place between 2.5 to 3 years. So it makes a lot of sense for them to invest in rooftop for their
and the
operations.
people who are forced, they don't lobby?
That's an interesting question. I mean, there's no lobby because it's mostly these people are investors. So the power.
You have a big oil interest, so don't they lobby with the government?
I mean, I would say like because these are foreign entities, so they can't really invest in lobbying. But maybe there are things that takes place at specific. Sometimes I'm too scared to talk about this because I don't want to give anyone ideas.
All right.
So right now maybe they don't know, like they have to lobby to stop the transitioning.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing. But so if we start telling them, if you spend like
all right.
some chunk of that money. We will never transition to.
All right. Thank you. Let me open it up to the floor to ask questions. Who would like to engage our speakers? Yep. Do you need a mic? Sorry.
Here you
go. Thank you, everyone. It's a very interesting topic. So my question is maybe for any of you, especially Dr. Felix. So you mentioned it at the beginning, it's like this transition is like very difficult. So in general, when actually other people talking about it's like difficult. So can you explain actually what is the difficulty? So it's mostly about like the resources needed like to build like materials like solar panels, or it's also related like to maybe the power of like big companies in oil sector. So it's difficulty most about the materials, or also need, or is it about like decision making, like from governments?
All right, let's just take a few questions and then we can let them answer them all.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. For you, Felix, maybe. I would like to know what kind of deals you have, because do you only sell hardware, or is there any kind of deal where you could also sell the energy that is produced by the hardware that you sell to these kind of countries?
Okay, thank you. Maybe you have the microphone. Sorry. Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah?
This question is for Joshua. Joshua, I'm from the United States, from Washington, D.C., actually, so I was watching very closely the inauguration yesterday. And if the lobbying is bad here in Switzerland, just imagine what it is in D.C. I was going to ask, can you talk more about the transparency law that you all were able to pass in Switzerland? I think that'll be an excellent initiative for the United States. Don't ever see it happening. Don't ever see it occurring. But if you could talk a little bit more about what went into that, what went in on the back end in terms of your government trying to rally support for it, and then how has that played out? Have people shifted their votes anyway, seeing where their politicians lie?
All right. So then I think we've got 3 questions, and I suggest that you just take whichever ones you want to answer.
Yeah. So I guess I'll go first quickly. So we were talking about the difficulties we see. So let me start with some good news again, right? So we're talking about lack of lithium, not a problem. really not a problem. We need it for batteries. We need batteries because the solar and wind power is not always there. There's this beautiful German word, Dunkelflaute, which is a specific word for having it being dark without sun and no wind. And that happens, right? And then no solar, no wind works. So we need a battery, or we need hydro, which we have here in Switzerland with the high mountains. So we need the lithium, obviously, or other materials. It's not an issue. Like right now in Germany, there's some of the largest lithium deposits underground in the water. You can just wash it out of the water. It's all being developed. So materials are not really an issue. Producing solar panels is as cheap as it has ever been. It's amazing. Wind turbines, a little bit more difficult, but still getting cheaper and cheaper at the moment, and all good. So materials, I don't think it's an issue. We're solving that, or we have already solved that. What is the problem and the complication is laws and people. So we have two ways. So it's my kind of world, the utility scale world, and it's your world, which is more the rooftop household world, right? So in the utility scale world, we have a lot of not in my backyard problems, right? So I build these really large 300-meter wind power things, and people don't want them in their backyard. I understand, right? It's not very nice, right? But a coal power plant is not very nice either. So that is a problem that we are facing and that we have to work with. People get used to them. The engines get a lot more efficient, so we will solve that as well. But I think that's one of the key issues on the utility scale is the planning laws, the regulation, and the people. Everything gets better at the moment, so still optimistic. On the rooftop side, it's about convincing individuals to do the right thing. And that's a B2C business, which is bloody difficult. I tried that. I ran a B2C company in rooftop solar and things like that. And it worked, but it was so much more difficult than building my large projects. And here we come to maybe one quick thing I wanted to mention about the social things about that, because it's bloody unfair at the moment, especially in Europe. You fly, if you take an airplane to Germany, you go across the Swiss border, and suddenly you see all these solar roofs everywhere. And they're only on the nice-looking single-family homes. Only in southern Germany, where people are rich anyways, right? Because they had to invest 20,000. Might not sound a lot, but to most people, 20,000 is a lot of money. Not here in Davos, but for normal people, right? Like the people who you represent. And that's awful, because they then get subsidy for the electricity, which is paid by everyone. Everyone pays the subsidy according to the electricity we use. And maybe a rich person uses twice as much electricity as a not so well-to-do person because a TV is bigger and they have a pool, but not 10 times. So this is totally socially inadequate. This has just been changed in Germany. It's being changed in other countries as well now. But this really, really hinders the progress in the small-scale stuff. I think that's something that we really need to work as a society. The lawmakers need to do their job. They're doing actually a good job in Switzerland. There's a lot of great laws around that here, which is probably not a bit too detailed for here. But I think these are the two things that make it really complicated: regulation and convincing the individual.
Can I come back on the material storyline? Because when I go to social science conference, the whole story is about how lithium is polluting the water, the air, people are not getting paid, etc., etc. I understand in Germany they'll probably get paid and it won't be so bad. But can we really get socially sustainable lithium? And the solar panels, once you chuck them, they can't be reused. So you have PFAS on them. So you have new problems with the first batch of solar panels. So there is a material problem. It's not like there isn't.
Yeah. Of course. I mean, I don't want to sort of newspeak this, of course. I mean, there is big problems with lithium production. It is being addressed. If you talk to people at Glencore, which, obviously don't have the biggest lobby, but they're still people and they still try to do their job. And they are trying to do it better with the mining and all of this. And basically, it's something that will be solved by the market, because I won't buy anything that is produced under bad conditions, and my ESG department looks into it more and more, and it's going to get better over time when it gets a bigger market. But it's a problem now. Recycling, an issue as well, not just with solar cells, but wind turbine blades as well. They need to go somewhere. And yes, we're working on all of that. The solar cells can be recycled. It's quite costly at the moment. We have to get cheaper on it. The wind turbine blades can be reused. Again, we have to work on it. It's a nascent industry. It needs to go at scale, and then it will work. So yes, there are issues, but we need to face them as humanity.
So Josh, your turn.
I just want to address quickly on the social lithium thing as well, because we are currently also putting up a initiative about, like we call it Konzernverantwortung, which basically means the responsibility of firms they have in other countries. You mentioned Glencore. There is scandals always around Glencore in other country, and this initiative wants to put them to take responsibility not for only what they do themselves, but also for their sister companies on site. And I think that is going to be really, really important. The EU is more in the forefront there than Switzerland is. And I also want to say, just because 20K in Davos doesn't seem like much in this week, and the rest of the 51 weeks in Davos, 20K is also a lot of money. Coming to your question about the lobbying, and I think that is where you can see when a country is purely capitalistic, the more money is in politics. Our transparency law didn't come from the parliament itself, it came from an initiative. So in Switzerland, the highest governing power is the people. We vote about literally almost everything. So, and there's two ways. Either you put up an initiative, which means you have to collect 100,000 signatures in Switzerland within 1.5 years, more or less, and then people go to a vote for it. The other part is the referendum, which is when the parliament decides on something, the people can bring it to a vote as well. You have to also collect signatures in a shorter amount of time.
And the court, and the grandmothers.
Yeah.
Those grandmothers went to court.
Yeah, exactly. But that was even on a European level in the end. Exactly. On climate-related things, you can also bring things to court if you think the laws they make are not in the humanitarian rights level. So that's really the thing, right? Parliamentarians probably would have never made that law pass through, and that's the good thing about like a Swiss direct democracy, which is very hard to implement in other places, obviously, but where you can see where the people have the last say, you can pass these kind of legislative works.
But on transparency, the EU has a transparency law too for lobbyists, and my students have been looking at it, and it's really easy for sophisticated people to be transparent without saying very much, and the NGOs get really stuck because they are not able to do all those things. They don't have the resources to do that. So it also makes inequity, it also has inequitable results. And you're allowed to say anything you like that you think is good.
I think I'm not going to talk about the transparency because I think that's something applicable to other parts of the world where like we're still revolving in terms of like our governmental system, etc. But I would say like in terms of like the challenges, we've discussed this before the panel, and we're talking about like what do we do with solar energy materials after 20 plus years. This has to be like some good supply chain or ecosystem available where this can go and be reused or repurposed in a way or another, or at least responsibly manufactured. And then in my answer to you was well, at this moment, 50% of the energy generation is coming through diesel generators. The grid is already, fossil fuel based, but diesel generators are like 20 times more polluting and 20 times more expensive to generate power compared to solar. I think I said 45 cents per kilowatt, but actually for solar is 1.5 to 2 cents compared to that. So that's the situation we're at today. Like, do we stick to this? Or we like transition immediately to renewable and then figure out in 20 years what do we do? Maybe hopefully by then we have like a proper ecosystem in place to support us.
So I want to invite you all to ask.
Sorry, if I could just very quickly add to that, what people totally forget that diesel generators have to be recycled as well, right? I mean, people talk about all this, all our renewable stuff needs to be recycled, all the old stuff, a petrol station needs to be recycled, a power plant needs to be recycled. It's always there, right? So we always have that. Sorry, you want to do
nuclear waste. We still don't know what to do with it.
Yep. But first, let me just give the audience a chance to say.
I think I didn't answer this gentleman's question.
Try that.
Just very briefly. So we do all of that. So we don't sell the hardware. We develop the project, then we own the project. We own over 0.5 gigawatt. We're growing to 5 gigawatts. We sell the electricity over a terawatt hour already and that's probably interesting, to large corporates. So we have a big contract with Carrefour, with Mercedes-Benz, who directly buy from us the energy, from our wind turbines, from our solar farms to run their production. And we're not the cheapest. But we've got two great advantages. First of all, we are locally produced green electricity, so that's what they want for their customers as well. And then secondly, we are dependable, because our costs stay the same no matter what happens with the oil price, no matter what happens with the global economy, because the wind will continue to blow, our turbines will continue to turn, and electricity will come out at the same price for 20 plus years. So that's what already is there, and what's getting stronger and stronger, that we don't need government subsidies, but we directly sell to consumers.
Some more questions? Maybe I would like to ask a question to you and you. When we're thinking about neighborhoods, should we really encourage rooftop solar prosumers, so producers and consumers in one unit, or should we encourage what you are saying, the large scale? If you do it yourself, then of course you don't have to pay energy bills. So it's a one-time investment, and then you're independent, whereas you might be raising the price of electricity every year. So what do you suggest? I mean, apart from your own private interest, what do you suggest should be the way in which renewables should be developed in different countries?
To be honest, I think it's good to continue, in parallel with these two directions, because government is taking the initiative to produce at least 20% of the energy from renewables by 2023. I don't know if this is still the plan, but that's, what the Iraqi government and also the KRG government plan was set a few years ago. And this still needs to take place along with rooftop. We're not talking about yet we're not at, going net zero or going, transitioning 100% away from, but at least bridging the gap or filling the gap in the supply that we have at the moment, which is still huge. We're talking about huge amount of gigawatts.
What about the employees in the fossil fuel companies in your country? Do they object to the fact that maybe they have a lesser future?
Who are the employees? I would say we need to be very specific about who's actually getting paid by this sector. Yeah. Less than 1% of the Iraqi population is employed by oil and gas.
Yeah.
But are we also talking about, government salaries that is being paid also, by
the whole sector? Once you close down that
the
sector,
one commodity and the one and only commodity.
Yeah. So when you close down the sector, a number of jobs will go, not just those in that direct sector, but those who are producing tractors that use diesel and so on, unless they can immediately change. So there's a whole lot of sectors that will fall. And is there any discussion amongst those sectors about how to do a just transition in your country?
I would say just transition is, there's no way, at least not in 30 years from now, we will stop, generating electricity from fossil fuel. But the question is, how much from the gap we have today, the 50%, can we do it with renewables? And how much from the new demand that is taking place annually, the 2.5% increase in demand annually, can also
So then that becomes additive. It is not replacing existing fossil fuel, which means it doesn't really address the climate change problem.
That's the issue, because it does address, because that...
It addresses in terms, but it doesn't bring you down. It just makes sure that...
That's why I said we're not going net zero.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Got it, I understood. Josh?
Well, I think the reskilling part of this discussion is very important, but we see this in all sectors, and we have seen this always in history. Back in the days we were farming ourselves. Now we have tractors. Yeah, people do different things. We had bank tellers. Now we have ATM machines. So I think reskilling is an important discussion. We need to have it, but it's also something which happens in every sector, and it has happened all throughout history.
But it is painful.
It is always painful, especially for in different generations.
And it is painful for those who don't do skilled work and cannot easily learn skilled work.
Yes, yes. And this comes obviously from a privileged country where we also have the financial resources, social security, but also free education. And it's also part, of then governments where they need to be invested not only in the transition of energy, but also in education.
So you make a very interesting point, because the social security is not there in many developing countries. So the transitional costs of closing down fossil fuel will be higher there because they haven't planned for it in terms of social security.
But this is where I see where the global north or the rich countries, especially in Europe and America, could take part, because reskilling, education, you can do this from anywhere in the world. And there is initiatives from Switzerland where we go to other countries how to teach them and to do this reskilling works. And we need to see this as a global issue, as long as also developing countries have a CO2 output of much, much more than what we actually should be. We will suffer still as well. We can be climate neutral in Switzerland. Our mountains will still collapse because everybody around us is not.
Exactly, and so that's a very strong argument for making sure that the cost of capital, that's your argument, in the developing countries is much lower, simply because it's necessary for all of us. All right, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just two quick comments to your point, your question about the technology, right? I still remember I was at Tsinghua University in Beijing 15 years ago, and there was a big discussion going on about if it's solar, if it's wind, if it's gas, if it's coal, if it's nuclear. And then a Chinese colleague went on stage and just said this whole discussion is totally superfluous. We do everything as fast as possible, as intensively as possible, because we need so much electricity. And that's actually something that I still remember whenever somebody asks me about these discussions now within the renewable space. I mean, we need to do everything, right? And we can do everything. And then on the home energy, what is hugely important is the battery. Because if you have solar in an average house and you have a super cheap battery, which we can get now, the cost of a battery has gone down from 2 years ago, $250 a kilowatt hour, to at the moment $90. And my people tell me that it's soon going to be at $35. That's crazy. That's cheap. That's free, right? That means you can save power for free. And then you can really not have the grids congested, because electricity doesn't need to go from my power plants all the way to your home, but you can have it within. You can have e-mobility to take care of that. So that's making me very optimistic again. And then the last answer quickly to the whole real skilling thing, I think you're absolutely right, and I'm very happy to hear somebody from your party say that, because every time I'm in Davos I talk to the International Trade Union Organization because of that topic, right? Because it's really important. But if you look at the numbers, there's such a vast higher number in the new industries and all the stuff related to renewable energy than there is going out in the oil and gas industry. It's ridiculously different. And yes, you need to reskill, but that's fine. We need to do it anyways. I was just at an AI discussion. We need to relearn the way we work anyways in the next 5 years, everybody tells me, right? It's just how it goes.
True, but I know that another of my students is working on the energy transition in Italy, and they're looking at how transition funds are being spent, and they're not necessarily being spent on the labor who loses their jobs. It's being spent on other areas. Are there other questions you feel like asking? This is the moment. Got 3 good experts here. No? Then maybe we start to wind up the session, and I'll give each of you 1 point to make.
I think it's good to take this opportunity maybe to raise some points to help us understand. You mentioned, Dr. Felix, that when you try to work on the investments in North Africa, the risk premiums were really high. Right now in our parts, in our country, we have this issue. Utility scale projects, agreements are being signed, but they are not being executed. And the question and the conversation is always around that they need to increase the PPA tariff rate. So even though according to the range of the PPA rate that the Iraqi has set is already much higher than Gulf countries, it's between 39 to 42. So I think this is a good conversation. Yeah.
If I can just quickly answer to that, I mean, this is too low. I can't build for that. I need probably 80, right? We're talking dollars, I guess, right? Yeah. So I mean, it is what you said. It's about the cost, and that probably is quite low. So I understand why nobody builds, because we need an internal rate of return of 8% or so to make it work. Otherwise, I bring my money to the bank, or I have somebody else to take the risk. So I mean, number one point, I think really important, especially in the spirit of how to bring fossils to sustainable in a global setting and not just in developed countries. I think we have to structure the risk and take the risk away from people like me, because I cannot go to my shareholders and tell them, look, I just want to do something good for the world. I have to go to my shareholders and give the IRR that I promised them. And I can only do that if I can share that risk in a global responsibility setting. And that is something I need help with from a political or from a World Bank or from some other setting. I think this is the key point that I can make here, because then we can make these things happen. Then we can make, because we have the skills, we have the willingness to do it. Of course, I mean, I'd love to do it, and my team would love to do it, but it needs to be in a way that in the end I earn more money than I spend. Otherwise, I can't do it. Yeah.
And here we go into the capitalistic way of thinking as a social democrat. That's always very difficult for me, right? But I think, and it's a fair point, I understand the system we built works this way, but we also might have to rethink this. And one way to solve this, then, if people don't want to pay a lot of money because they get less return, is then fair tax systems. Because there we can have then, in the end, the people who profit the most, the people who get the most money, redistribute a little bit of that enormous amount of money, which is also walking around here, to those countries, so governments can eventually afford those places who don't need to have those extra money in return.
Thank you very much. It's almost 36, 37 years since we started the climate change negotiations. And although we have had national meetings every single year, international meetings every single year, the progress in rich countries to demonstrate that they can go off fossil fuel has been remarkably poor, in my view. You do see that renewable energy is taking off, and I really hope that the renewable energy will take off so much that the fossil fuel sector collapses. But I think we have to also help the fossil fuel sector to close down. And that help means helping them transit in a equitable manner for especially the employees. And this brings me to the story about Global South countries. More than, I think, 80% of the remaining fossil fuel is in the developing world. And so many of them argue in meetings where I'm teaching them or I'm learning from them, they argue that it is now their turn to use the remaining fossil fuel. And I think if they do use their fair share of fossil fuel, then we all suffer. So what we have to do right now is to figure out this new system that you're talking about, which creates the finances to enable low interest rate in loans, or just simply no interest rate loans to these developing countries to enable the energy transformation, because it's in all our interests. We need to make sure we don't cross 1.6. Thank you.